Welcome to Exit Capitalism, Stage Left. This is your host, Manda Riggle. This podcast is brought to you by the Maggie Fair Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. The primary purpose of the Maggie Fair Institute for Democracy and Human Rights is to educate people, especially young people, about democracy and human rights. This purpose will be achieved through, but not limited to, such practices as hiring an educator, sponsoring projects, sponsoring forums and workshops, showing educational films, operating a library, developing educational materials, and producing podcasts like the one you are listening to right now. To start things off, we're going to take a look at what's in the news related to human rights. And of course, no inspection of human rights would be complete in the U.S. without first looking to the Supreme Court. And we do have, as of today, 2/23/2022, when I'm recording this part of the podcast, we do have a huge case that the Supreme Court is taking on about whether religious organizations can discriminate against LGBTQIA plus people who are trying to get married. And we did see this first kind of come up from the Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission in 2018. And the civil court ruled in favor of the person who refused to bake a cake for a same-sex couple. And we're seeing a similar case come up again in 303 Creative versus LNS. I believe it's LNS. Which is an online business, and it's giving them a chance to openly discriminate against LGBTQIA plus customers. And I'm trying to find the words to say it doesn't look good. It does not look good for human rights in this case. It really does seem, given the court's record and given the makeup of the court and given how the court has ruled in previous instances of this, it seems that there is going to be a case decided where LGBTQIA plus people can be discriminated against even further. There's another past case, and this is according to a Vox article. The Supreme Court will hear a big case about whether religion is a license to discriminate, posted on February 22nd, so yesterday. They are also highlighting that there was another case, Fulton versus the City of Philadelphia in 2021, where the court handed down a nothing burger is what they're calling it, opinion ruling in favor of a government contractor who refused to work for a same-sex couple seeking a foster child. But it was on very exceedingly narrow grounds. What's, I guess, groundbreaking about this case is it would open up a lot of these previous decisions that were very narrowly decided by weight of the court and very narrowly applied, and make it something much broader. So we are looking at a Supreme Court case which can open a floodgate for discrimination, and it really does look like the court is going to rule against LGBTQIA plus people in that case. Moving to our next topic, I really wanted to cover some climate stuff, and so I really wanted to look at NFTs, or non-fungible tokens is what they stand for, and a lot of people think that cryptocurrency, which is akin, like cousin to NFTs, that these kind of digital mediums for currency and production are waves of the future. But there's a few things wrong with them. First, just thinking on a human rights scale, they terribly pollute. Like this idea of all these servers storing a piece of digital art that cannot be replicated, that is locked up, that is tracked down, that has like coded logs on it, that takes a lot of power, and that actually consumes and pollutes a lot of our environment. It consumes a lot of resources. Same thing with like cryptocurrency. Essentially, it's both NFTs and cryptocurrency are a pyramid scheme where you need other people to buy in order for you to make a profit off of this. All of capitalism can really be classified as a giant pyramid scheme, in my opinion, because it's based on this idea of expansion for profit. But NFTs and cryptocurrency are especially pyramid schemey. And there's a lot of I've heard the term, and I like it, crypto bros that are really pushing this as a way to be financially free, to escape capitalism, et cetera, et cetera. But really, it's just another problematic way to steal money from those with less and put it into the pockets of people who are creating these things, who are investing money and time and essentially lying to people. And on top of lying to people, taking advantage of people, telling them that this is a wave of a future, they're also severely damaging the environment. There's a good article on The Verge called "The Climate Controversy Swirls Around NFTs." And this is also where this idea that they're a pyramid scheme comes in. A lot of people have been saying that, but it is, I think, just really important to touch on that these are not anything new. These are not waves of the future. Cryptocurrency is unbacked, and I know the US dollar and other like national currencies are also imagined, but these are especially harmful because the way they prey on people. While currency is imagined, cryptocurrency is detrimental to the people that buy into it, and the same thing with NFTs. So my degrees are in English, I should say. I'm an ABD. I don't do necessarily financial things besides spending my own money. But it is, I think, a really good article. So if anybody wants to check that out, you would just look up theverge.com, the climate controversy swirling around NFTs. And again, avoid them. That's just a general thing. They're harmful for the environment. They're harmful to people in general, just because they are there to take financial advantage of you. They are not there to help you. There's also problematic subject matter. There was recently a slaves, and I'm not even joking, that was it. It was slaves, NFTs, which were digitally depicted portraits of Black people, and you can own one. And the people who created this NFT, when they were called out, said, oh, we're going to do it for all races. We just started with Black people. So the ideology behind NFTs extraordinarily problematic in their content as well as in their application. And now moving on to our last, I guess, kind of like ranty negative news piece that I'll be covering. There is a U.S. trucker convoy that is trying to replicate what the Canadian trucker convoy is doing. For people not familiar with what's going on, truckers at the Canadian kind of border, I believe it's the border, have been protesting mask rules. That's it. They don't want to follow mask rules. And that we're seeing that there is a convoy in the U.S. calling itself the People's Convoy of truckers that are trying to do the same thing, similar to what's going on in Ottawa, so not border Ottawa. And they are looking to go to Washington, D.C., and they're going to start in California, which is the state I'm from. I always think this is interesting. People who claim that they should have the freedom to do something because that's how they define the word freedom, although the U.S. isn't really free. But there's also the freedom from something. And I think when we talk about like medical things like COVID-19, people who want freedom from being infected by the disease by wearing a piece of cloth over your face, which isn't that intrusive. It's interesting because the same people who tend to protest this idea of a piece of cloth over, I can't get over it, a piece of cloth over your face. Or if you get the disposable masks, a piece of paper over your face. And the same ones who are, always kind of talking about women's bodies and controlling them, wanting to control children's bodies, LGBTQIA plus bodies. Like it's the same crowd. So don't touch their face, but they can fuck with your uterus. So all right. But it's interesting. There's another kind of like freedom to infect group marching on Washington instead of Ottawa. We'll see how this turns out. I think it's just kind of important to highlight right now, COVID-19 numbers, Omicron numbers are falling. So that is nice, at least. It does tend to happen in warmer weather from what we've been seeing over the past, 3 years of the pandemic. Sorry, a lot of sighs today. So hopefully everything turns out okay. Even if I don't agree with their ideology, I don't really want anybody to further continue or spread this disease more than they have to. But with capitalism reopening and forcing us all to kind of participate, there really doesn't seem to be an end in sight for this. But yes, there's going to be a U.S. trucker convoy replicating the Canadian trucker convoy. And now on to our final bit of news. And this is a happier segment. This is my kind of like good news, what I call, dedicated to my comrade Mimi Saltisic, who passed, who said that we should always hang on to our small victories, because in the fight against capitalism and the fight for human rights and democracy, there is an ongoing intergenerational battle going on. And sometimes if you're only looking at that big picture that you might not achieve, you miss your smaller victories along the way. So this is kind of celebrating a smaller victory. And I especially love this one because fuck Elon Musk. Right now, the state of California is suing Tesla. There's a lot of cases and things going on against Elon Musk. I'm still planning on doing a Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos episode, so I don't want to cover it too much here. But essentially, the dude, Elon Musk, who inherited his money from his parents, who made all their money in emerald mines during apartheid in South Africa, has been found to discriminate against black employees, which is a big fucking no shit. Totally surprised there. The guy who earned his money off of apartheid emeralds and treating black people in Africa as if they were not fully human is discriminatory. But it's good that he is being sued for it. It is good that it is being recognized that he has discriminatory practices. And it's good to stand up to this huge corporation and this billionaire. So while the discrimination is not good, obviously, it's discrimination, it's good that he is being sued. Like, fucking sue Elon Musk. Please, everybody sue Elon Musk. I will join in your lawsuit. I don't give a shit. Just email me. We have an email for the podcast. exitcapitalismstageleft@gmail.com. I will fucking jump into that lawsuit. And that kind of ends our news segment. And now we're going to go on to some recommended readings. And this week, I should call this, I need to think of a different name for this segment because I don't want it to just be readings. And this week, it's not a reading. I actually want to recommend a cheesy musical. The music is outdated. It's very 90s, like kind of pop that thinks that it's rock. But the message in the movie is good. And I think people might guess what it is already from that description. Rent, the movie Rent, based off of the Broadway musical Rent, which is based on Puccini's La Boheme. It was adapted by Jonathan Larson in like the late 90s, late 80s, early 90s is when it was done. And so a quick kind of like description of the movie that I just ripped off of IMDb. Wow, I can't talk today. Based on Puccini's La Boheme, Rent tells the story of 1 year in the life of friends living a bohemian life. Yeah, not my words, fixing grammar as I go. Living a bohemian lifestyle in modern day East Village, New York City. In 1989 and 1990. Among the group are our narrator, the nerdy love-struck filmmaker Mark Cohen, the object of Mark's affection, his former girlfriend Maureen Johnson, Maureen's Harvard-educated public interest lawyer and lesbian lover Joanne Jefferson, Mark's roommate, HIV-positive musician and former junkie Roger Davis, Roger's new girlfriend, the HIV-positive drug addict S&M dancer Mimi Marquez, their former roommate, HIV-positive computer genius Tom Collins, and then Collins' HIV-positive drag queen, street musician / lover, Angel. And then their kind of former friend / enemy, Benjamin Kaufman III, who was part of their kind of like bohemian, like fuck the system, art first, experience things, especially like the play, musical, movie, whatever, really does kind of emphasize that things are temporary, like implied by the word rent, but also the time that people have, especially the people who are living during the AIDS pandemic in New York, where, I mean, now we have some nicer drugs for it, but we have to remember this is also set almost 30 years ago when they didn't have those things, and where Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan were just not giving a shit and not helping anybody. It was a huge epidemic. People were dying. And it's still an issue today, even if it's become less so of one. But it does really emphasize this idea that things are temporary and you have to live kind of in the now and do what you can now. And their former friend and roommate, Mary, somebody rich, takes over the building they live in, tells them they don't have to pay rent because he supports their lifestyle, and then turns around and says, you have to pay some fucking rent, and we're also going to develop this area and kick out a ton of unhoused people. So the main plot is about like love and life and art, but then there's this whole subplot about like what is rent who deserves to live here, whose city is it, what do you do with like the unhoused in the area. So the idea of Benjamin is you push him out and you make an art installation, because that's what bohemians really want, is art, right? You don't need the unhoused. But Mark and Roger and other people, Maureen Johnson, they put on a show to kind of try to benefit and draw awareness of this. It doesn't go so well, but there's this idea that everybody deserves to live there versus nobody. So it's kind of a musical about gentrification. Before we might have even had the term gentrification. I should probably look up when the term was made, but whatever. I could be wrong. I'm fine being wrong sometimes, but it is a musical about gentrification as a back plot. And there's always this interesting scene. It's recorded. It's not like they could take parts out. Maybe it's different during live performances. I haven't seen it, but there is this part where the artists are confronted by an unhoused person and they said, what am I going to do? Eat your fucking art? Like, that can't feed me. And so it does also kind of problematize what we see a lot, like the first stages of gentrification where artists move in and then it becomes more developed. In this movie, at least the artists are kind of fighting back. They understand life is kind of temporary. They understand rent is a scam, right? Not the movie, obviously, but paying rent is a scam because everything is kind of temporary for them. And yeah, I recommend it. Again, music maybe isn't the best anymore. It is very interesting. Also, La Boheme is good, which is, instead of AIDS, it's tuberculosis, similar kind of like plot, but set in France. Both very good musicals. If you're into musicals, if you can tolerate musicals. Now onto the next part of our show, which is our interview portion. This is pre-recorded. I'm going to kind of like put it in here. If it sounds a little different, we're actually recording this at a church while we were cooking for Food Not Bombs. So we're just kind of like hidden in the back away from the kitchen and sitting there on my laptop. So hopefully the sound quality is pretty good. It's probably not going to sound the same as I do right now. But yeah, now we have an interview with Nina from Riverside Food Not Bombs, who is a kind of like longtime activist and one of the main people who revived the local chapter. And really, we talk about some things related to what we do in Food Not Bombs, but also this idea of radical kindness. And now we have Nina, a local activist from Riverside Food Not Bombs. So I'm going to go ahead and hand the mic over to Nina. Can you give us a bit of your background in activism?
Right. So I've lived in the Inland Empire for about 8 years, but I've been involved in activism ever since I was conscious. I grew up kind of in the punk scene from back home. And the punk scene is very much, community-based and anti-establishment. So I've always grown up with that kind of ideology in mind that, you take care of each other because the state's not going to do it for you. And I've been, going to the Iraq War protests and stuff like that. So I've always been kind of up on activism. I took kind of a break while I was in college and then got into the COLA movement back in about 2019, 2020, where graduate students were asking for a cost of living adjustment for students across the UC to come to parity with the living costs that we enjoy here in Riverside. So I got back into the activism scene with the COLA movement in 2019, 2020, and then when the pandemic hit, it seemed like a very important place for me to put my energy into feeding our community because so many people were struggling during the pandemic. So I set my sight on increasing our ability to recapture or reclaim some food that would otherwise go to waste and redistribute it within our community.
Yeah, and I know you from COLA, and then we moved into Food Not Bombs together. One of the big things that I think COLA was addressing was housing insecurity, and we've also seen a lot of housing insecurity continue in the Inland Empire and Riverside specifically because we've had, I think, the OC Register said this, and another news source said this. Riverside and the Inland Empire have had the greatest inflation of any place in the United States right now. And we see that reflected in food prices as well, and in people's like ability to access food and to have food. So I know you also do the Riverside People's Free Market that happens the second Saturday of the month at Fairmount Park. What is it like out there with people? Like, have you heard from the people and what their food needs are? Or has struggling gotten better recently with our lovely, air quotes for people who aren't here, lovely President Biden? Or have things pretty much stayed the same since the beginning of the pandemic?
From what I've seen, I feel like things are getting worse. It's only getting more expensive to live. It's only getting harder out there. I feel like the number of people who are being displaced and forced out of their homes is only growing. There's been very little done to mitigate the pandemic, and so people are still struggling. People are still hungry. And every single time we make as much food as we can possibly manage, and we get rid of all of it pretty quickly. So there's a huge demand out there.
Yeah, and volume is about like 100 servings per service, which is at least 2 weekends a month, because that's kind of what we're all working people. That's what we can pull off. What are some of the other orgs and some of the other just kind of activism scenes going on in the Inland Empire that you know of?
So every second Saturday, as we just heard, we do a free market in Fairmount Park from 10 to 2 p.m., second Saturdays. And we are joined by other orgs in the area. So some orgs cycle in and out, but some of the consistent people who have been showing up are San Jacinto, Hemet Mutual Aid, SJH Mutual Aid. There's Communit IE, who does...
they don't even know how to say their name.
Yeah, I like to say community, but it's spelled Communit_IE. They come out pretty consistently. There's Punks in the Park. There's Cat 911. What's RM's organization?
I think that's just Riverside Mutual Aid.
Oh, yeah, and then there's Riverside Mutual Aid comes through sometimes. And actually, just this past market, we got a literal truckload of pantry stable items donated. So we do get plenty of donations from the community as well. So even if you're not part of an org, it's really easy to get involved. Just find us and drop some food off to us, and we will make sure it gets to some hungry people.
And I think something we didn't discuss, because this is kind of on the fly, we're actually cooking for Food Not Bombs right now while recording this podcast. Let's talk about maybe mutual aid, and not necessarily like the theory behind mutual aid, but like the idea behind mutual aid and what it like kind of maybe does in your eyes and what it does for the community.
Right. So mutual aid, I think, is... it's very much part of human nature to just help out when you see people that need a hand and you're able to offer some kind of assistance, right? And it's definitely not the only thing that's needed for a full-on, building a new world that you envision, but it is definitely a first step. And so mutual aid, I think, is a really important thing to me because, so this is going to sound kind of cheesy, but I feel like a little anecdote kind of works out here. So when I was in elementary school, my principal used to have this inspirational speech that she would give where she would always have this catchphrase, make a difference, right? And I'm very sorry for how cheesy this is going to be, but it is straight up a speech that a elementary school principal would give to the students. And it goes like this. So there's all these starfish just washed up on the beach. And you see these starfish that are sitting on the beach out in the sun. They're all going to die. And you're walking with your friend and you start throwing these starfish back into the water. And your friend says, what are you doing? You can't possibly save all of these starfish. And you say, well, I made a difference for this one and for this one. And I don't really see what I do with Food Not Bombs as, saving anyone, definitely not. But if I can feed somebody a meal that they wouldn't have had otherwise, that is some form of kindness and something that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise, right?
Yeah, and I think radical kindness is something that is part of, like, everybody argues that human nature is like capitalism, but we have to understand that capitalism is an exploitative system that does irreparable harm to people and the environment and just animals and like pretty much everything. And when it enables certain characteristics to take place, and it really does try to suppress and eliminate that shared human kindness that we all have. I will go into a personal antidote as well, because I can talk. I'm the host. I don't have to just make you talk. So as a early teen, I ran away often, didn't have the best home life. And I still remember a very lovely woman in hijab who was actually getting a little bit bullied. This was like the late 90s. But she saw me with my friends, and we were all unhoused at that point in time. I was like 14. And she actually walked up to me and gave me $20. And she said, "Go home to somewhere you're safe." She didn't know my home wasn't somewhere safe, but I still remember the kindness, even though she had just experienced, again, not from my friend group, but we did see it happen. She had just experienced like discrimination herself. She still had kind of the ability to care and to offer care. Same thing. I remember the kindness of getting like somebody handing you a bag of like really shitty, but like delicious at the time, those 39-cent hamburgers that McDonald's had. Like as a teen with no food, without a good home life, it's like, oh, cool. Thank you. And just like, again, kindness of others. And it's interesting to see like when people have like taught us kindness or inspired kindness in us or shown us kindness, how like we're the ones who are kind of stepping up and giving that kindness back, because we're both kind of the reviving members of Riverside Food Not Bombs that brought it back to the area during the pandemic. And I think we can't really underestimate kindness as a form of radicalizing people in the community. Because sometimes all it takes is a little bit of kindness for somebody to realize they don't have to participate in this exploitative, horrible system. There's ways of helping other people that aren't through capital. And so, sorry, clearing my own throat. Let's go into maybe a bit more about Food Not Bombs, like the revival of it, and maybe just like the background of it, the philosophy of it.
Sure. So for anyone who hasn't heard already about Food Not Bombs, it is a horizontally organized kind of anarchist in nature international organization, actually, where we take donations from the community of food that would otherwise go to waste, and we prepare meals that are vegan or vegetarian. We tend to lean more vegan, though, in our own chapter. Anybody can start a chapter in their area, and so that is what we did. In the summer of 2020, we saw the need in this area, and so Amanda and I kind of reached out to see what other orgs were doing in the area, saw that there wasn't really a Food Not Bombs chapter at the moment. I feel like there was a Food Not Bombs chapter maybe 10 years ago. I think it kind of petered out in 2012 or something like that. But either way, it wasn't active, and we weren't stepping on any toes when we started ours back up. So we just kind of reached out, saw who was available and how they could show up, and decided to organize around that, what was available and who can step up.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because the first thing we did was kind of make an Instagram, and we're just like, hi, we need food to give to people. And so a worker at a local Italian deli reached out for bread, so we were able to secure a bunch of bread. And from Riverside Mutual Aid, one of our comrades organizations, gave us vegetables, and so we were able to do that. And I think we just like out of pocket, I think I had a bunch of rice, so I'm like, we'll make some rice and chickpeas. We were very concerned about having a gluten-free option, and we found that nobody else seems to care when we have, but we do still try. But we made, in like someone's backyard, I think like 75 sandwiches and then 25 servings of like curried chickpeas over rice. And then we gave that out with a grocery haul to, with a week's worth of groceries with Riverside Mutual Aid. We gave a couple warm meals to people that were ready to eat, or ready to be heated up. So that was really nice. And it's just kind of continue from there. And we do have those generous food sources, incoming. There's actually like a plethora of people in the area. Anytime we put out a call for food, we always get something. And then there's orgs we can reach out to through back channels. We have community members who cook for us. And we still, even though Omicron's like lifting a little bit, we still do COVID safe food prep, and we ask other people to mask, gloves, clean area, etc. But yeah, it's done a lot of growing since we started. We're doing this because we have a bunch of volunteers in the kitchen cooking right now, and there's almost too many people in there cooking. But yeah, the topic that I wanted to talk about for today, which is something I've just gotten back into, I think like a decade ago, I gardened a little bit, and then another fun story. My ex's tortoises broke out and ate like $60 worth of tomato plants, and so my heart was kind of broken. And I just like, also I didn't live in great places, so I couldn't really garden too much. It's hard to grow stuff, when you don't have a window or sunlight where you're renting. But I know you are a prolific gardener, and I wanted to talk about like gardening in general and if it can be seen as a radical act, which is maybe a weird question, but I think it can be, and I think you think it can be, so we can maybe talk about that a little bit. So I don't know if you want to take the mic.
Sure. So I don't really have a good garden going right now because I just moved into a new place and I have to get my land set up. But I hope to have some garden beds started before this spring growing season. And a nice thing is that I have so many friends in this wonderful community who are willing to come out and also can benefit from me having a kind of a stable place, because like you said, it's really hard to get plants going if you don't know if you're going to be in your spot for very long, or if you don't have a good area to start growing. So that like a stable piece of land is something that I can offer to my community, and that in itself is, I think, a little bit out of the box if you kind of live within the bounds of capitalism, right? You're supposed to have your own plot of land. It's just for you, and you're not really supposed to share with your community, right? To me, that's just kind of repulsive that, you would just not. But yeah, so I think that gardening definitely can be a radical act because you're supposed to go to the store to get everything you need, right? You're supposed to pay dollars and cents for everything that you consume. And of course, the startup cost for gardening is really high, right? You got to get your soil, you got to get all of your tools and everything like that. So starting a garden can be pretty pricey. But the idea that you can grow something that you need straight out of the earth, that is something that I feel like is kind of lost and is very... it's very easy to separate people from that, especially if people don't get to have a consistent place to live.
Yeah, and a really big thing I think was interesting, and I don't remember who made this observation. I can't remember if it's when we were still doing kind of cola stuff at one of our kind of group conversations, but I remember somebody was doing a grocery order and a grocery pickup, and they had seeds available in some stores, but what had happened is they weren't available for things like Instacart, and then some places actually made it. Again, this is during the height of the pandemic when people could not get food. You could not get food delivered because like everything was out, right? They had actually put like tape around the seed saying you can't buy these. So it's interesting that the second, and right now we're seeing some of the consequences of that, which are these highly inflated prices that have been going on and the record profits we have for like all the Nestle and things like that, where supposedly we had a food shortage, which is why prices went up, when there was actually an artificial shortage and record profits. And we see one of the first things they cut off is the ability to purchase seeds to grow food yourself. And so something you really touched on, which relates to kind of what I study, is this idea of closed off land and this idea of like land being purchasable, because we got rid of what the English used to call, or I should say Europe used to call, the commons, which was open land anybody could use that wasn't owned by the crown before they transitioned into a capitalist system where all land had to be closed off. And so it wasn't even just like all land was owned by the crown except for this. It was just all land was owned. And we see with the expansion of the British Empire, the expansion of Eurocentrism, we see land closure as a major tool of forcing people to participate in the capitalist system. I think to garden, It does. Sometimes it does. If you have a nice plot of land, fun fact about housing tracts, usually they put houses right on really good soil for growing, and then they isolate the farms to places that are desert. I don't know why we did that. Like Orange County used to be orange groves, and then they're like, fuck these oranges, I'm going to put a house right here. It's like, wouldn't the oranges do better? But we see that, like, yeah, this idea that you can't have land, you can't have sustainability outside of the system cut off. And, you know, if you buy a pepper from the store and you save those seeds in some wet napkins, you can get some sprouts, you can plant those sprouts, and you can have a pepper plant that you spent like, 50 cents on now $1 for a bell pepper on at the store. Same thing with a jalapeno, right? There's like all these little things you can do, but we're not taught to do those things, and we're not given information. Like, it's something that you have to kind of seek out, because sustainability and self-reliance or even community reliance are things that are kind of alien to the capitalist system. But yeah, you also share. I remember a lot of times we'll be cooking and you're just like, I have so much kale, and you just bring in like a ton of kale. Same thing like with a ton of the lemons that we have that we're using right now. There's this idea of like shareable harvest. And then do you want to talk about maybe Overflow Farms a little bit and like what they do? Because I know you're more experienced with that than I am, because I think that's another kind of form of radical gardening or farming.
Oh, definitely. If you didn't bring them up, I was going to. So Overflow Farms is a small sort of 1 to 2 acre plot out behind an elementary school. I believe it's an elementary school. And the owners just post a call for volunteers, and anybody can show up during the hours that they post. They have a couple of different time slots throughout the week, and you show up, you work on the farm for a little bit. It's really nice to just kind of get outside in the sun, and then whatever job you're capable of doing, you know, be it weeding, planting, hauling things if you're able. They'll find something for you to do, all skill sets, really. And they have a couple of steady volunteers and people who kind of cycle through. I've been a couple of times, so I would consider myself an occasional volunteer at the farm. And then after you work on the farm for maybe 2-ish hours, they send you off with as much food as you can carry, because they just generate so much on this small plot of land. And then, you know, they source a lot of their labor just from willing community members who just want to be involved, and who also get just the psychological benefits of being outside, meeting other people who are like-minded, and, you know, harvesting just pails upon pails of peppers. And so this is one of the places where Food Not Bombs gets a lot of their fresh produce from. It's always so delicious. They'll send you home with whatever they have a bunch of, whatever's in season. So sometimes we'll get a bunch of peppers, sometimes a bunch of tomatoes, greens. They pretty much always have onions. And then they also work with a couple of other community services. So I know that they're connected with somebody who can do mobile showers for the unhoused. And they also donate a lot of their food to food banks. So yeah, that is one example of somebody using their space to service the community, definitely outside of capitalism, because I have never seen $1 exchanged anywhere near this farm.
The work they do is really amazing, and it is always like appreciated. I love onions and everything that I cook, so I always like when we get like a giant bag of onions from them. And it's actually like, I just want to touch on the generosity of farmers. Sorry. Allergies, everything is fucking right now in California. Like, it's warm, even though it's just mid-February. Like, literally all the trees are just like pollen, and it's like, thanks. So, but the generosity of farmers, because a lot of the times the fresh produce that we get comes from like a farmer's market down the street when we do collections. And actually sometimes farmers remember us from going down there. We had last like big growing season, like I think like 2 pallets of green beans that a farmer just remembered us, and they're like, these are slightly overgrown, they're maybe a little bit tough, but I don't want them to go to waste. If you guys cook these down or pickle them, they're going to be great. And so we made pickled spicy green beans, and then we did like a stir fry, which probably wasn't a good idea because it was like 100 and something degrees, and the kitchen we cook in doesn't have AC. So I personally almost fainted, because it's like we're using a wok and like stir frying that. Not a good idea. Don't don't stir fry green beans in 100+ degree weather. But it was still like really generous. And anytime we go down with like a cart and we ask for donations, we generally come back with some pretty good stuff. And that's just local farmers. We're cutting out kind of the middleman in capitalism. We're just, I think the legal term is gleaning, where we're just asking as a independent, affiliated with anything. We're not a nonprofit. It's just a group of people doing work. But yeah, it's always surprising how much food we get. Same thing. People will just say, here's a bag of, stuff from my tree. I think you have experience with like one couple that comes in a Prius and just gives us like really expensive vegan cheese.
Oh yeah, definitely. Shout out to the couple in the black Prius, always coming through with just like these gorgeous donations of like really nice vegan butter and stuff like that, like the good stuff, right? You know how there's bad vegan butter and good vegan butter. We our weekly food prep or just sort of weekly food preps come out so tasty. And so we have tons of community members coming through with more or less consistent donations. There's also somebody who lives just in my neighborhood, like where I personally live, just around the corner from me, who has offered up garden beds for us to grow things, and has also offered just a variety of different donations. Another shout out to our comrade Francis, who has so generously donated a bunch of kitchen supplies to us, like really nice things that have made the prep go so much more easily, so much more smoothly. So yeah, having all of these supplies has been it feels really great to get these donations from the community, to get that kind of support. But also, it helps us get more food to more people.
Yeah, got the NutriBullet we got, like made it so we could process these baby guavas. We'd never seen, they were tiny guavas with a lot of little seeds, but we were able to use the NutriBullet and the strainer, both donated by Francis, to make a really tasty salad dressing. And yeah, I think, I guess to summarize everything that we've done, like it's all been about like radical kind of kindness, and not just like being radically kind, but seeing others be radically kind, and how that like affects and uplifts a community. Like when we're giving out food, when we are asking for volunteers, when we're asking for donations, when we're working like with the community, with other orgs, or just with community members who are either giving or receiving need, like we've seen nothing but kindness. Occasionally, because we do vegan vegetarian food, a question of where's the meat, but not too often. We do also get like monetary donations to our Venmo and our Cash App, which I think is just like Riverside FNB. Or if anybody, we have an email for the podcast now. If anybody would like to donate, you can just email me. You can also find Food Not Bombs on Instagram, which is just, I think Riverside Food Not, you're right, the Coke did make me burp. I think it's just Riverside Food Not Bombs. Like you can look on Instagram and find us, and our Venmo and stuff's on there. But we do things like outside of maybe the mission of regular Food Not Bombs, where we go and we buy tents and tarps and blankets. And then we help out with like the clothing at the free market as well. We try to make sure that the community is taken care of, because as Nina said in the beginning of the interview, coming from the punk scene as well, we realize that there is nobody there to take care of us if we don't take care of each other. The government's not stepping in. Oh, I guess that's a fun antidote. Do you remember our first service with RM that I referred to with Riverside Mutual Aid, where somebody from the city who worked with unhoused populations in like the Keystone, I think, like where they were giving like hotel keys or motel keys to the unhoused, they approached us. So we were like 3 grad students, 2 of which have now graduated. I'm still working on it. But they approached 3 grad students who just stayed up like for a couple hours making sandwiches about providing food for the city for all of the unhoused. Do you remember that?
Of course I remember that. And I'm like, you have all the money and all the power and you need us? Like, we're just doing it. Oh, yeah. And so I wanted to go back a little bit to what you were saying about kindness as a radical act. And I think about this all the time when I'm interfacing with the community and helping out people in need. And it's so I feel like the cruelty of this system is so apparent in how neglected these people are, the ones that are hungry, coming up to us, asking us if we have any coffee, if we have any food, And something that we like to focus on at Food Not Bombs is not just making caloric meals to feed people, but to make them nice, make it a treat that somebody would want to eat. We're not just going to make you breakfast gruel. We're going to make you waffles with some fruit on top, because people deserve to eat something nice. You get to have a nice brunch. And we had also talked a little bit about, once COVID hopefully one day finally calms down, doing like a sit down table service, because imagine how people react if a group of unhoused people walk into a restaurant and want to have a sit down service, because I don't know, maybe it's their birthday, or maybe they just feel like it. Who cares, right? They deserve that too. And that I feel like this cruel capitalist system really depends on erasing these people, making them invisible, and treating them as cruelly as possible, as if that would make them disappear. So I don't know, I feel like kindness in this scenario goes so far, and people really appreciate it. It really shows. And also, to be kind to people in your community just comes naturally. And this really shows up with how people show up with donations, be it monetary, time, or with food donations. People in the community naturally want to do this because we're human, and we naturally want to take care of each other. So this just really speaks to how unnatural it is to live in this cruel capitalist system.
Thank you so much for that. And yeah, thank you for your time. We can get back to cooking. We're making gochujang, like greens and chickpeas, and then we're doing like a chickpea masala and collard greens, and then we're doing peach cobbler right now. So trying to make good food with what we've been given. Yeah, and the food turned out great. We had a lot of servings. That was for when we do mobile service, we have a bunch of volunteer drivers who kind of pick up food, and then we also at a local church give out some food. Just outside of it, the Riverside Universalist Unitarian Church, kind of non-religious church, but still a church. I don't really know how it works. They're just very kind with their space. But now, after that interview, we're going to go ahead and move into a review of some resources that the Maggie Fair Institute has. We did just add some new graphics to our downloadables page, which are some quotes from previous kind of like podcasts and articles for people to share. And we're also reviving our Instagram. We do have a page that hasn't been used very much, but I am going to try to take that over and start promoting a few things on there. And you can find links to those resources and more on our website, maggiefairinstitute.org. If you found this podcast, it was probably through that website, so you're already on it. So just explore some of our other tabs. We have blog posts. We have lesson plans for high schools and middle schools. We also have infographics on things like how to unionize, just some basic kind of steps to get started. So please take advantage. A website is there. I've created a lot of these materials, and past educators have created those materials. They are for you guys. They are free for the community. So please take advantage. And now on to our last segment is where we kind of hear from our listeners. And we do have an email now. It's just exitcapitalismstageleft@gmail.com. Kind of a long name, but the name of the show, no punctuation. If you send us a question or a comment or something you'd like me to speak on, I will cover it in this segment of the show. And today we have a pretty kind of basic one from just a comrade. Nobody sent me an email yet. You guys, you got to send me an email. But this is a question that I get often just because of like veganism in general. But the question is, what do you think of the quote, "There is no ethical consumption under capitalism"? And I think the quote is accurate. There is no ethical consumption because everything, and I will emphasize yet again, everything under a capitalist system comes from exploitation. But at the same time, that doesn't mean all exploitation is equal or that something is, it's just started snowing outside. Sorry, I've never lived in the snow before. Distracted. So anyway, back to the quote. There is no ethical consumption under capitalism. It doesn't mean that everything bears the same weight unethically. So an example I kind of brought up when I started this segment before I got distracted by literal snow, is this idea of veganism. So a lot of people say, veganism isn't without exploitation, and that is true. A lot of times what we're consuming still is manufactured by workers. It's still created by farmers. It still takes up land. It still takes up water. It still takes up resources, but it is measurably more ethical than consuming meat. And this isn't just looking at like an ecological or planetary. This is looking at workers. This is purely looking at workers and the exploitation built into the system. So when you are eating vegetables versus consuming something produced by an animal or animal flesh, you are actually cutting out a huge, I just can't even emphasize, industry that heavily exploits and harms its workers. The meat industry is one that not only underpays and heavily exploits its workers in addition to animals, but it's one of the ones with the most injuries. A lot of workers are maimed. A lot of workers are harmed by producing hamburger, chicken, etc. And then I believe it was like last week tonight had actually John Oliver's hit or miss. He's usually very good at like, here's a problem in capitalism, but he doesn't ever realize that capitalism is the problem. It's just like, this is bad and I'm going to make something funny out of it. But anyway, he did this great one on chicken farmers a couple years ago. Just talking about how exploitative things like foster farms are. Not just that it harms the birds, and the farmers do feel sympathy for the birds in this clip, which is nice. But they talk about their own exploitation, how they're purposely given underweight chickens and then penalized if they go against the system, and how they're underpaid, how they have to upgrade their facilities. They bear the burden of the cost, and then essentially they're given chickens that underperform, and therefore they never kind of like recoup and they go bankrupt. And then the foster farms moves on and finds other chicken farmers to exploit and harm. So it's not a great system. When you consume like the vegetables, when you consume like the mock meats made of pea protein and potato, you're cutting out a heavy segment that harms workers. And while none of it is ethical, it is least harmful. So I think there are other ways to measure things besides in pure ethics. And also, just because something is not ethical doesn't mean it's as unethical as something else. And so that's not saying everybody should go vegan. It's just, again, measuring that there are measurable differences in ethics, even if everything isn't ethical under capitalism. So that's kind of my example and my response to just a common question. If you want to hear something specific, again, please email me, exitcapitalismstageleft@gmail.com. And that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Exit Capitalism Stage Left. I've been your host, Amanda Riggle, and this podcast was brought to you by the Maggie Fair Institute for Democracy and Human Rights.